You mentioned being in Iowa and reading your book about in the parts about your life on the campaign trail. I had forgotten that you had gotten that Dave Chappelle endorsement and that he had really come out for you like that in the context of the campaign. And I wonder what you make of all of the controversy that's going on right now around his most recent special.
Well, it's different if you know the person. Anyone who knows Dave knows he's an extraordinarily just great human being. Independent of that, though, I just think that attributing outsized responsibilities to an artist or a comedian is just not a productive thing to do. And that's true if a comedian says something that, I find offensive. There's a comedian that slurred me directly, and I was like, probably shouldn't lose his job over that. Of course, he did lose his job because that's the time we live in. But on this one, I mean, I know Dave. I've spent time with Dave. Dave was one of the best folks who, when they supported me, decided to actually drop everything and come to Iowa and perform on his own account just to help the campaign. Like, didn't make a dime. Like the rest of it. I mean, like, who does that? You know what I mean? If you're at his level and you just decide to help the relatively marginal presidential candidate because you think it's going to help people. I would confess to having my experience with Dave obviously colors anything else.
Did you watch the latest special? I'm curious.
I did.
So one of the critiques, and we did an episode on this that people felt different ways about. There were a lot of different kinds of jokes about a lot of different kind of communities. That's often the refrain that you hear from people who are, defend Dave Chappelle. And one of them was a joke about getting coronavirus and analogizing his immune system doing a good job fighting it because he didn't have any symptoms, to anti-Asian hate crimes executed by Black folks. Right? Do you remember that joke?
I do remember that joke, yeah.
And I'm curious because, that joke, the child molestation joke, there's other kind of jokes that I would describe as off color to be, political about it, that didn't get a lot of media attention, that target me as a woman or you as an Asian man and all of these other kinds of things. And I wonder what you made of the kind of that differential in attention, given that you are someone who could credibly be offended by at least one of the jokes in that special.
Well, again, knowing Dave as I do, his wife is Asian and she's lovely. And so, imagining that Dave would have some kind of negative intention just strikes me as completely off base. So again, my experience with it's probably somewhat different. And that's the way I think that these things should be taken is, he's performer and entertainer, and he can say something that you may find troubling, but then, it's like, I think that's kind of the nature of the job. And knowing Dave as I do, it's like, I didn't think anything of it.
Yeah, I mean, I wrestle with this. Yeah, I'm really not trying to corner you into anything. I wrestle with this because I said this on our last episode about this, that I, as a woman, I'm like, well, him saying bitch, even, I don't want my partner to call me a bitch, but like him saying in the context of the special, I remove it and say it's something different, and this is like not about me. But there is this other argument that says, well, if I were a more vulnerable population in the way that trans women in particular are, then, is there, I think the strongest argument is this kind of rhetoric makes people feel empowered to actually execute violence in real life against this group. And maybe then that matters differently than it would against me or you. Of course, Black women certainly receive a fair degree of hate. And there's some argument that a significant part of the hate criming against Black trans women is rooted in that same kind of misogyny. And certainly we've all been watching the, anti-Asian hate movement grow in response to the growing hate crimes over the last couple of years. So it's neither here nor there. I was just wondering.
I mean, it's a terrible time for a lot of people. There are a lot of people who are vulnerable. A lot of people are struggling. A lot of people are getting hurt. I just think that the reasons why there's this violence and pain goes way, way beyond, like anything that's on Netflix, in my opinion.
Well, I can't not ask you about the New York mayoral race, because that's the big thing that happened since we last spoke. For a lot of people on the left, the part of your campaign where your campaign kind of took a turn for the worse after seemingly being in a kind of a good position for much of it, was your comments around the airstrikes in Israel, Gaza. And as someone who is so good at social media and so, I think, insightful about how the things you say and do are going to help you politically. I mean, I've looked at you in your campaign and thought to myself, oh, I'm jealous because I wish Bernie would do X, Y, and Z. You have a bit in your book about, getting advice about how to change your image and getting a haircut and getting tailored suits and thinking this is silly and it wasn't going to matter. And I remember thinking to myself, gosh, if I could have only gotten Bernie and some Buddy Holly glasses, everything would have been different. I was surprised. Well, let me put it this way. I was wondering if you were surprised by the reaction that your statement got, a statement which you later walked back. And I wonder if you think that you would have done anything differently in retrospect, and if that was really a turning point in your campaign in your eyes.
Well, it's tough to know, Briahna. I mean, in the midst of the campaign, I will say that I think that if people saw how some actions and decisions and tweets get made, I think it would be a very different type of read. When you're in the midst of a campaign, there are actions, and this, having worked on a campaign yourself, that there are actions that are taken that have a lot of input from a lot of different directions. That I think in another circumstance, you might have used a different medium or framed something a bit differently. I'm not sure what effect it had on my campaign, genuinely. It was a campaign that I think at that point started turning towards public safety and crime to a much higher degree.
Well, that's another thing that's so interesting because, you write very compellingly in your book about the Black Lives Matter movement and the effect it had on you. Specifically, you talk about your choice to endorse Mike Broyer,
yeah.
Sorry, in the rather than Booker in the race against Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, the Senate race, and how after the fact, after George Floyd's murder and the protests and the kind of prominence that Black Lives Matter started to have in political life, you started to doubt that decision. And then when, McGrath ended up losing, you were reflecting on whether or not you should have endorsed differently. And, you say several times throughout the book that you're someone who does make these decisions based on principle. And it feels that way. It feels like you are someone who is willing to do an unpopular thing. This campaign for ranked choice voting is evidence of that. But then there are these moments, but there are these moments like that moment during the New York presidential race, the fact that you seem to be turning toward this law and order bent in New York. I watched the debates and I saw you emphasizing the presence of police on subway cars. And, I'm not naive to the fact that a lot of New Yorkers do feel unsafe and do believe that a greater police presence will protect them. But there was a lack of nuance in the conversation, I think, that was really in contrast with the way that I've seen you very sympathetically show an understanding of issues like crime, including in your book. So what was going on there in your decision to kind of frame yourself as more of a law and order candidate in New York?
Briahna, a lot of it's born of the conversations I'd have with New Yorkers every single day and what they're concerned about, whether they're Black, Asian, white, Jewish, there are a lot of concerns were very similar. And a lot of New Yorkers were feeling very unsafe during that time. There were a lot of families who were considering leaving as a result. And so, I made a case that I genuinely felt. Now, that doesn't make me unmindful of the abuses and inhumanity that have been visited upon people of color. I also met with George Floyd's brother during the same campaign. These things are both, to me, true, that there have been real abuses and excesses that have been inflicted upon Black people, and also that most people of every background, including people in poor Black neighborhoods, or in some cases, especially in poor Black neighborhoods, were really concerned about rising crime and shootings in particular. And there are different ways to try and address shootings and violent crime. Police is not the only way. But police is one of the ways, and I think some of the other solutions, in my mind, should be brought to bear as things you'd want to invest in. But it wasn't like an expedience thing. I genuinely thought that this is what that what we should be trying to deliver to people in neighborhoods.
I mean, what do you make? Do you think there's air between where you kind of were on those issues and Eric Adams, who I think a lot of folks see as much more dogmatic and disciplinarian and less open to the idea that what's really needed is to prevent crime and to shift money to social services, and so that people who are intervening in domestic disputes aren't necessarily coming in there guns cocked. You know, the kinds of things that you wrote about and demonstrated, I think, a real competent understanding of in your book. It doesn't seem to me like Eric Adams has that same competent understanding, but in the course of the mayoral campaign, you guys were starting to come off very similarly in this area. I mean,
I met with activists. I met with people that I share a lot of their belief in what needs to happen in a lot of these neighborhoods. I think people know that, like you said, I understand, that you have to try and rebuild the fabric of a lot of communities. One of the ways I thought would work would be to put economic resources into people's hands. Another way is investing in various environments or programs or resources. I obviously prefer cash. I mean, I'm also for these other things. It's just the moment that New York is in. It felt like, that there was a need for delivering to people like a genuine sense that, we weren't going to allow their families to be unsafe or their neighborhoods to devolve. And this is a time when I think 3 New Yorkers are being shot every day. So this wasn't it wasn't a political calculation. It was like genuinely like 3 people are being shot every day. Like, we need to do something.
Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.